We've got Keith Sonnet, who is the Deputy Secretary General of UNISON, and he's got quite a bit of international experience. He's chair of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and vice chair of Justice for Colombia. He also, I think, unique, if I can say, amongst one of the pioneers in the trade union movement in terms of bringing green issues and climate change to the trade union movement, and having developed a trade union project on climate change involving unions in a number of countries. And what's really nice to see is that integration between social and environmental justice issues. So I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you for those kind comments. Can you hear me at the back? I prefer to stand as a trade union official, usually with my back to the wall, so I'll do that tonight, because that's what I'm used to. I was also due to go to Cochabamba, but on the 15th of April, the volcano ash spread everywhere, and I was unable to go. Nobody expected the airports to be closed for 5 or 6 days, so by the time it was opened, it was too late to go. So I really missed what was a really exciting and wonderful experience for those the 17,000 odd people who were there. Most people think of trade unions as being concerned about the relationship between their members and their employers in the workforce, but we do have a much wider agenda. We are very much solidarity organisations, supporting people who are facing difficulties, human rights abuses in different parts of the world, including in our own country, and we believe very much in collective action. And so we see climate change as a very, very important part of our agenda in the trade union movement. It's very high on our agenda. And we see it as an issue of social justice for a number of reasons. First of all, it's intergenerational. The climate change has been caused by past generations and their carbon emissions. And if we don't act now, we are storing up problems for future generations. It's a problem of the developed countries who have industrialised that cause the great carbon emissions that is causing problems in the developed world. So it's an issue of social justice between the North and the South. There's an economic argument, as Stern showed, that if we don't act now, it's going to cost more in the future for future generations to cope with climate change. There's also an important link we see with the Millennium Development Goals. If you want to improve literacy rates, if you want to improve education, if you want to improve health services in the developed world, it's not going to be possible if we allow climate change to continue the way it is happening, because the farmers in Darfur can't sow their seeds because of climate change. They're not going to be able to have a sustainable living. They're going to be poor. The same for people in Bangladesh. If rising floodwaters prevent them from dealing with their agriculture, they're going to be poor. We're not going to be able to meet the Millennium Development Goals if we don't tackle climate change. And also, the impact of climate change tends to be on those who are most vulnerable, the young, the elderly. There's also some anecdotal information from various research projects in different universities in different parts of the world that examining mitigation policies that governments have adopted that shows their impacts adversely on gender, so that women tend to be more adversely affected than other parts of the community. You've only got to look at the effects of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans a few years ago that shows very clearly that as a result of that, the old, the elderly, the infirm, the sick who were most adversely affected. The European heat wave in 2003 again impacted mostly on the more vulnerable sections of the community. So for us in the trade union movement, the issue of climate change is an issue about social justice between those who are in the developed world and those who are not in the developed world, between generations, between the haves and the have-nots, and it's an important issue for us. I think the trade union movement has a very important role to play in advocating the need for change to deal with climate change, and I see us having 5 key roles. First of all, there's an education role. Most of the opinion polls in this country have shown that the majority of people are sceptical that climate change is caused by human activity. I think the last poll I saw showed that something like 56 or 58% of the population in this country didn't believe that climate change was caused by human activity, and the number of sceptics have actually increased. And it's the same in a number of other European countries, and it's certainly the same in the United States and elsewhere. And my union represents about 1.5 million workers in this country. They all have families. We probably directly or indirectly reach about 5 million people in this country. The trade union movement has just under 7 million members. The trade union movement generally probably reaches about 25, 28, possibly 30 million people in this country, directly or indirectly. We're the only other organisation in this country, apart from the political parties and the church, that actually has a structure that we can reach such a large proportion of the population. So we believe we have a very important role in educating. And following on from that, we won't be able to tackle climate change unless we change behaviour. It's not just governments that have to change behaviour, or corporations that have to change behaviour. Individuals, you and I, have to change behaviour. It's important in order to change behaviour that people understand the importance of tackling climate change and reducing the human activity that we all go through that causes climate change. Thirdly, there's a collective bargaining agenda. In this country, in most of Europe, 50% of carbon emissions come from the workplace. And a high proportion of those carbon emissions actually comes from buildings, more so in some towns and cities, obviously, than others. And studies that have been done through the TUC and pilot exercises that have been undertaken show that if employers involve their workforce in discussing and developing strategies to tackle carbon emissions from the workplace, it actually leads to a reduction in carbon emissions. And there's a whole issue of creating green jobs. And various studies have been done, and you'll probably be familiar with a number of them, that shows that we can probably create at least 1 million jobs, green jobs, to deal with various issues around energy supply and carbon emissions. And so the role of the trade unions is arguing for green jobs and the change in and the reskilling of the workforce in different ways to provide for green and sustainable jobs is very important. Fourthly, we can't tackle climate change alone. We have to build alliances with NGOs, with other trade unions, with other trade unions, other countries, and we need to, and we can't tackle climate change by ourselves. So this role that the trade unions have in trying to build alliances with NGOs and others, I think, is very important. And fifthly, we have to develop the advocacy skills that we need, not just at an intergovernmental level and trying to affect the intergovernmental talks that take place, but also the discussions that take place and will increasingly take place in individual national governments about the policies that they are going to adopt, either to meet any targets for carbon emissions or in terms of mitigation policies that might be adopted. The trade unions and NGOs and community groups need to have those advocacy skills to be able to play a part in the policy making that will take place. And again, there is evidence from various studies that have been undertaken that trade unions are not involved in these discussions which are already taking place elsewhere. So I very much believe that the trade union movement has a very important role to play in arguing for policies to deal robustly with climate change. And all the trade unions in the UK have signed up to the International Trade Union Confederation agenda for tackling climate change. And the ITUC, which is the Global Trade Union Confederation, supports a legally binding, ambitious international agreement that sets really ambitious targets for carbon emission reductions, and we want that to go hand in hand with policies of just transition and the creation of decent work, because climate change can be tackled in a variety of ways, like in the workforce, as I've mentioned before, and employers and governments can make decisions about dealing with climate change. It can either impact adversely on the population, or it can impact in a more equitable way. And so the ITUC is arguing very much for a robust and ambitious agreement on reducing carbon emissions, but also to go hand in hand with just transition, with the developed world providing the finance to enable the adaptations to take place and the development in other countries in a way that provides decent work, not only in the developed world, but in the underdeveloped world as well.